Hughie O'Donoghue, whose fifth exhibition with Marlborough this is. So I hope you all had an opportunity to have a look around the show. We're delighted that he's here to talk about his work and his career with Tom Marks. Tom wrote a fantastic introduction to his work in our catalogue for this show, which you're all very welcome to take a copy of if you haven't got one at the end of the talk. So Tom is a freelance writer and critic, and is also, I'm right in thinking, the current associate fellow at the Marlborough Institute. So with those words, we're delighted to have them both here to talk about the exhibition and Hughie's work. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Frankie. And what a delight to see so many people in mid-January. There's wine, so it must be a work. Hughie, it's really wonderful to be here talking about this body of work that I first saw in your studio in Greenwich a few months ago, back in September, I think. And I think it probably makes sense for us to begin by talking about the gestation of the work and how it differs from perhaps how you worked in the past. This is all work on the whole produced during the period of the pandemic, isn't it?
Yeah, yes it is. Thank you and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come in. Yes, most of this work was produced during the pandemic, the lockdown period. I actually had a separate studio in Deptford, which I took on just before the lockdown, by chance really, and so that in itself was quite different. So during the lockdown I used to do this walk from Greenwich to Deptford, a 10-minute walk, and which was very strange really, because you're going through the centre of London and it was deserted. It was a bit like a sort of dreamlike quality to it, that you're walking through a city with very few people, or the people who you did pass, they kept their distance. So all of that fed into the work. Artist life, in most cases anyway, is solitary. It's a kind of solitary existence. You work in your studio usually by yourself, unless you're part of some collective or what have you. But nevertheless, I think the pandemic had a sort of a strange dimension to it, and so so most of the works in the show were made in this period. I've included some earlier paintings of this looming wreck of a ship, which kind of now looks slightly prophetic in retrospect, because it's when I started them, I think I was thinking about Brexit, but anyway, I ended up with Brexit and the lockdown. So the lockdown has affected the work.
I want us to talk about the different types of work in the exhibition during the course of the next 45 minutes or so, but I think for the audience, perhaps we just give a brief overview of there are three distinctive types of work here, or at least there are works on three different supports. That's right, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, well, I suppose when I started to frame the exhibition here, there's a lot of different things that I'm doing at any one time, but one of the things in making an exhibition is I feel you need to try and make a coherent statement about what you're doing, and I was thought, well, what is going to be the linking factors of all this work? And the first linking factor was water, rivers and the sea. So I decided to limit it to that, but also the materials that I was using. I'd begun experimenting using industrial tarpaulin some years ago. Part of the reason for that was historical, because I had made a lot of very large paintings in the past on a rigid stretcher format, and the immense difficulties of moving work like that, and storing it, and everything gets multiplied the larger you go. So at one point I had this idea. I thought it would be really liberating to make paintings on something you can roll up on a tarpaulin, and that idea was a bit of a breakthrough. It took me a while to find out how to do them, but I also discovered that paint technology had actually moved on. My work that I became known for was very thickly impastoed oil painting on stretched linen canvas, and that becomes very brittle over time, and so rolling it is not a particularly good idea. So one of the qualities that the tarpaulin had was it came already creased, and a kind of quite a tough industrial surface, had a sculptural quality to it. And so what I found is that rolling them up actually improved the paintings, which was an unforeseen bonus. In fact, one of the largest ones I transported on Ryanair in a suitcase, halfway in progress, and there's something terribly liberating about that it's not precious. You try and make a painting. Hardest thing in making a work of art is actually to make a work of art, not to preserve it. That's somebody else's job. But in a way, what you're trying to do is make something that's vivid and intense. And so to get back to Tom's specific question, the tarpaulin was something I wanted to use. There's something also about the way it's screwed into it, the wall or onto the stretcher that's kind of very direct and physical. You can see the mechanics of the picture. You can see the screws, you can see the folds in the tarpaulin, which tell you something about the history of the thing itself, which is made in India, and then it's folded up and it's sent to me, and so it's something about its own history. It also was reminiscent of the actual steel plate structure of the ship that I was painting. There was a kind of steel plates that were riveted together. And so a number of things about that echoed what I was doing. So I decided to include the tarpaulin paintings, which are of a particular ship, which we may talk about later, but it's a ship I saw first in 1961, when I was wearing short trousers, and I came across it on a remote island off the west coast of Ireland, and it was a very vivid thing to see, unexpected, and I've been back to this ship over many years, and so it's become a kind of motif, right? It's perhaps the best word to say about it. The other two groups of works are made, one on sack and the other one on sandbags. The sandbag piece, which is here on my left, is of Deptford Creek in London, which I used to pass every day on my route to work. I had no idea that I might make a work about it, but at some point, looking at it, I thought, well, why not? Why not? Why are you doing pictures of lots of other things and not this? This is on your territory, it's on your patch, it's on your path, and it looked like an archaeological dig to me. And so it appealed on a number of levels. I decided to make it on sandbags, partly to give it this irregular grid, but also to, sandbags are used to protect against water, so they're kind of, they're meant to be like little individual segments. They create this grid image. They announce to you what they are with their drawstring ties. They're actually filled with the newspapers of the day, so they're kind of a time capsule as well. So certain ideas about this moment in time, and obviously they're not picturesque. I was interested in something that might be beautiful rather than picturesque. Not the same thing. And the other section, small section of works, images of the sea that were made on sacks, in this case, the coffee sacks. And I had an idea about the idea of cargo being like things that you carry with you in your memory, something that's like a cargo of a ship might carry. And I thought a lot about my grandfather, who spent his whole life unloading sacks and unloading. He was a railway labourer at the Alden Road Goods Station in Manchester, and so it's kind of a way of connecting with something in the real world that you know and is personal. So all the materials used were repurposed and they're not fine art materials. And so, yeah, that was what I'm interested in at the moment.
I love this idea that you're able to carry one of these tarpaulin paintings in your suitcase, hand luggage on Ryanair, and obviously they bear the marks of the folds, and as you mentioned, look like the welded steel plates of the Plassey, the ship. But I suppose one of the things that these paintings are a testament to is a time when, yes, you were in the studio alone, and you're usually in the studio alone, but it's a time when you weren't able to travel. You wouldn't have been able to take these paintings on a plane with you had you wanted to. And in some sense, as an artist who has thought a lot about journeys, you were stuck in the single place, or your only journey was this particular journey that we can see mapped out. 15 minutes from Greenwich across Deptford's Creek to your studio. That feeling of being in one place only, has that, do you think, informed these particular works?
Well, yeah, my younger children were incredibly fond of travelling the world. There's fewer places in the world that they haven't been that I could list, really, rather than where they have been. My interest in travel is different. My interest in travel is actually in mental travel, the mind, the journey that one makes in one's mind. And so, John, I suppose what I'm saying is that to be in one place, you travel in a different way. You travel, the journey is one of mental reverie, or I mean, one of the kind of questions that's behind all of my work really is, what does this mean? What does it mean? Why do you select this as opposed to something else? And I think that I'm not diverging here, but I think of beauty in art as a product. What I mean by that is that it comes through the process. You don't start out trying to make a beautiful painting, so that you say, well, I'm going to make a beautiful painting, you've got to make a beautiful subject, or this lovely sunny day with flowers, or what have you. And I don't do that. What I select is something that has engaged me, and so I think of travel in that way. And I've used a lot of photography in the work, and so my archive, my photographic archive is, I think of it a bit like memory. I do make drawings, sketches and things, but I use photography a lot to record images that I'm interested in. So travel is a mental activity, really, for me, and it's trying to make sense of the world.
We'll come back to the physical archive of photographs and images, and, as it were, the archive of your mind and memory later on. But you talk about process and a sense of looking for meaning while creating the work, which leads me to think we ought to talk a little bit about your studio practice before we, insofar as it is possible to separate out thinking and painting for you, which I suspect is probably a quite false dichotomy. But particularly I wanted to ask, and perhaps with these works in focus, since our audience can see them, how far experimentation, pushing yourself away from things that you've done before, is still really important for you as an artist?
To do something new is always the challenge. And I forget, I think it was Tim Marlowe said to me, he'd never met an artist who didn't think the best work he'd ever done was the one he was doing at the moment. You know, there's a sense of that, because you wouldn't do these things if you weren't excited about seeing. One of the motivating factors in doing something like this was incredibly labour intensive, actually, is to see what it's going to look like. You have an idea, and you think, oh, that might be interesting, and then you investigate it and find out where you can buy sandbags on the internet.
Where can you buy sandbags?
You buy them 1, 2, 3 bags. But that actually became a problem with Brexit, because 1, 2, 3 bags are in Holland. And so I had to get these bags sent to Ireland and then have them smuggled in. But that's dealing with the realities of the world. So you get an idea, and usually the best ideas I get, first time I get the idea, I think that's ridiculous. Why? That is a ridiculous idea. And then you think, no, maybe it isn't so ridiculous. So the idea of the sandbags, and then you think about how you're going to join them together, and these images were taken on a mobile phone. I mean, they're not high-end Hasselblad photography that's been, it's not about that. It's about using.
Did you crop them because they're square?
They're cropped.
Yeah.
They're cropped, and I think that was an important decision, because that makes it slightly claustrophobic, and it makes it all about looking at the ground and looking at the water and looking at the sky, even though you're not. The sky's reflected, so it's got all these components in it, and it's the sort of thing that nobody would look at really, except there's nothing there, but there's everything there as well. And it's certain ideas about armour, strange associations. I had in mind these jade princesses that they buried in China, where they have these sort of jade costumes, which were all little squares of jade that are linked together. I don't know why that was at the back of my mind, but that was there. The idea of a kind of, I mean, this piece particularly operates in a number of different categories. It's sculptural, it's photographic, and the painted part of it actually is very small, but it's kind of essential, because the painting just pulls it together. If there was no painting in it, it would fall apart.
Can we clarify that? The paint on these works is in the joints, it's more glue.
Primarily in the joints, yeah.
So it's not that the image is particularly touched up or washed, it's that paint is a glue for you rather than
with these ones, it's very poor. It's very sparsely done. It just pulls things together, really, in a sense. It's quite a conceptual thing, really. It just joins it up. It's a bit like, Frank Stella, when he did his black paintings, when he was trying to make a progress with painting, he just reduced it to black house painter's paint on raw canvas. So it became very stark. It's not about bravado brushwork or painterly skills. I mean, the tarpaulin paintings are different. and some of the earlier ones have a lot of luxurious impasto and translucent glazing and vivid colours, imaginary colours, whereas this is really very pared down.
I just want to press you a little more on these materials, which, as you say, are not typical artist materials. They're not materials that have been prepared for use by artists. And yet, one of the things that really strikes me is how much of your time you spend preparing the sandbags or the sack or the tarpaulin to paint on it, and how much that is part of preparation, is part of painting for you. So you have materials that are quite raw, but it's something of your tempo or your pace that you need to spend time before images emerge or images are applied to the surface. Is that fair?
It is fair, yes. I hope you can all hear, by the way. And do tell me to speak up about. Okay, Tom, you've got up the volume.
I might go without the microphone.
It's better.
Yeah.
Okay. The question, I think, about the preparation is a very good question, and it's a very interesting question. I do prepare these works myself, and it's actually an incredibly laborious process. The tarpaulins, when they arrive, are coated with wax, which is something that repels paint. So you've got to get the wax out of the tarpaulin. And that's, I do that with a scrubbing brush and with lots of kitchen towel to soak up the wax, and lots of, so you basically degrease it, and when you degrease it, then you can begin to prime it twice. And it's a very laborious process. These aren't particularly big, but in the large tarpaulins, which are 3 by 7 meters, that's a 2 or 3 day process. But it is an important process, I think, and it's still important, I think, for me to do it, rather than somebody else to do it, rather than just farm it out. The idea of using lots of assistants is something that doesn't appeal to me. I do have assistants from time to time, usually from my son Vincent, or from Stevie Scullion, who's a colleague I've worked with for many years. But really, I try to keep that to a minimum, because it's a mental procedure. It's almost like you're earning the right to paint the picture, to do it. You're preparing the ground. One of the things I've said when I occasionally go to art schools and see students, one of the things I try to say to them is, think about the ground. Whatever don't buy a canvas off of W.H. Smith's or something. It's, the ground you work on is like the ground you stand on. It's got to be, you've got to own it, and you've got to earn the right to do the picture, almost in a way. That's probably not terribly logical, but it's true.
Well, I think one of the things that has stuck with me about your work is that you often have said painting always takes the fastest route, but actually certain parts of I think that's in specific relationship to the use of photographic traces, that you have often used that phrase. But actually, painting is a process that is solitary, takes time. And would you say that those laborious works of getting the wax off the tarpaulin and so on, do they enter as a sort of meditative exercise for you? Are you thinking? Is your mind racing? Is it something? How would you characterize that process for you?
I'd characterise it as preparation, like a boxer prepares to go into a fight. If they don't prepare very well, they get knocked out in the first instance of the fight. So preparation is everything. When I use the expression about, it's usually about art rather than painting, that art goes by the quickest route. And what I really mean by that is it's not about showing off. You know, sometimes people say to us, oh, you're very talented. It's about the most insulting thing you can say to an artist, really. It's that you've got lots of skill and talent. I, like Van Gogh, had no skill at all, and it's hard work to make a piece of art authentic. It's not about showing how good you are at drawing, how clever you are at going through the motions. The hardest thing in art is to make something that's true, that's real. And so that process, I would see, is about taking possession of making the work of art, that it's your own thing. I mean, I use people to do different things at times like that, but it's always my own conception, and that gives it its authenticity. And so the procedure is also one of learning about, you know, when you get the brilliant idea to paint on a sack, and 2 days later you find that it's virtually fucking impossible to paint on a sack. That you think, well, yes, sacks have not been designed to be painted on, really. They're designed for carrying coal and all sorts of things, but not for painting them. So it's about overcoming this thing.
I suppose, can you hear me at the back if I speak like this? There's something to be said for, and perhaps it's particular to painting, that painting is a type of thinking, that applying marks on canvas or sack or tarpaulin is a way of thinking with your hand, with your body, with the memory of other marks that you've made. But it strikes me, you talk about truth in art in a way that is very distinctive, I think, to you, Hughie, and I think it's about, or at least it strikes me that you feel a great responsibility as an artist, a responsibility for what you make, a responsibility to the subjects that you take on, a responsibility to memory, a responsibility to history. I mean, do you feel like you're a bit of an outlier in that way, at least perhaps in painting in this country, for taking it, dare I say it, so seriously?
Probably yes, is the simple answer to that question. But yes, I think painting, if you're lucky enough to be an artist, to maybe a living being an artist, then perhaps there's some obligation that goes with that, that you've got to try and be the best artist that you can be. It's not a lifestyle choice. I never thought I'd be an artist, and I didn't choose it as a career option. I trained to be a teacher, and I became an artist by default, but I do agree that I do think art is serious. Even if you make art that's ironic and jokey, you've got to be 100% serious about that. And you don't always live up to that. And I can look at the work that I've made, which doesn't live up to that, and I frequently destroy it and get rid of it. But it is about something being, I think, authentic. And so I suppose one of the things I think about painting is that you think, well, you know, what's the difference between a painter and an amateur painter? Well, an amateur painter paints because what two reasons. They either enjoy it or they think they're good at it. I don't enjoy painting at all. But what I think I'm doing when I'm trying to make a painting is trying to make a painting that nobody else has made. That's what I'm trying to do.
On that point, I mean, I'm thinking about paintings that you've made as well, and trying to make sure you don't make the same painting that you've made before. This exhibition has the title Deep Water in the Architecture of Memory, and memory, the structures of memory, how we might envisage it as a building, a construction, or indeed as a liquid form or lack of form, are things that have percolated through your works for many years. Many of your recent series have taken on historic events, although obliquely they've had quite direct reference to them. So your father's experience in Monte Cassino in the Second World War, your paintings that have taken a view on and try to engage with the experience of the Somme. These paintings perhaps don't have such a direct historical glance, even looking askance, do they?
They don't in that sense. The Rapido paintings or the paintings about the Second World War very directly, they actually weren't about the Second World War. They're more about me trying to understand my father and who he was. Paintings about the Somme came about through a quite specific commission from Eton College, who lost more pupils in the First World War than any other, by some considerable distance than any other school in England, which interested me a great deal. And the names of all these boys were carved into the walls of Eton College, and so that's kind of in the fabric of the building and the school, and the people who are there. So in both cases, those are quite specific engagements with history, but the overall umbrella is that I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to extract some meaning from history. History is actually incredibly complex. It's nearly always presented as being quite simple, particularly by nation states. They present history in a very, very straightforward manner, in which usually myth completely drowns the story. I mean, the work I did in the Second World War, I remember initially going to the Imperial War Museum, photographic archive, and asking them, some curator came out and said, well, how can we help you? I said, well, I want to see a photographic record of the British Army in France after Dunkirk. And I was told they weren't in France after Dunkirk in 1940. I can't remember quite what I said, or whether I just raised my eyebrow, and they went off and looked at it and said, oh, actually, we've got 100,000 images of the British Army in France, because the myth of Dunkirk completely sweeps history under the, that becomes the thing we remember. And one of the motifs in German art in the late 20th century has been about how monuments are actually a way of forgetting things rather than remembering. There's been a lot of German art that has felt the need to deal with the legacy of the Second World War. And one of the legacies of that was this idea that in 1946 was year zero, which is kind of a ridiculous conception, that you could just forget what's happened. And so a lot of the themes that are in my work are about probing forgotten things.
It's interesting you mentioned the image archives at the Imperial War Museum, and you mentioned earlier your own archives of images. It really strikes me that your use of the photographic trace perhaps is sometimes misunderstood, or at least that when you use a photographic trace, you're precisely not using it to say this is a documentary image. You're saying, as I work over it, as I work under it as well, I'm showing you exactly how complex our relationship ought to be with images of the past. That we have to find obstacles when we look at them and be aware of those obstacles. We can't just look at them straight on as archival or documentary.
Well, I think I've kind of groped my way forward with that in a way. That I started using them. I thought, well, why not? Why not use this? It occurred first of all in the work I did that was around the Second World War, because I had this archive, which my father had kept. He took a lot of photographs in those days. And so I had that archive, and I had these images which, well, we all know that photographs can be used to do all sorts of things, but these were not. They were taken basically as records. And I suppose I thought a lot about what are you doing here? Why would you paint this? Why would you spend an inordinate amount of time painting a photograph? It doesn't make sense. The photograph is just a kind of factual thing. And I suppose in the paintings, in a sense, I've separated imagery from painting, separated them, and then brought it back together. So, really, I think people often get confused with paintings which have very strong images in them, because whereas they'd be quite happy to come across an abstract painting by Mark Rothko, Sean Scully, and say, well, it's just very nice painting, but once you put an image in there, it's like, well, what does that mean? So what I'm trying to do in the paintings is to forge a kind of tension between the object, the two basic there's only really two conventions in painting. The painting is a window and the painting is an object. Now, what I'm trying to do is forge something that's in tension. So when you look at the image of the sea, you also see it's a sack.
You make me think of what Orwell says. George Orwell says, good prose is like a window pane. So that idea that good prose, clean prose, is something you could look through. But actually, most windows in the history of glass were striated or had bubbles in them or breath in them. And actually, you can both see through them and you see an image distorted by their surfaces.
Yes, that's good.
And maybe that's a moment for us to come on to thinking about this image of the MV Plassey, the merchant vessel, I suppose Plassey, and how that appears. I mean, it looms out of the paintings often. It's a provocation almost to the viewer to say, here is this great hulking image in this painting, and yet it signifies very different things for you in different paintings. It seems to me, although I'm not sure I can project this interpretation onto them, that here it's not standing in for the warship it once was, because it was a submarine destroyer. It's not standing in for the raft of the Medusa, as it has done in other paintings. Is the ship, I mean, do you identify with the ship, or did you, over the course of making these works during the last 2 years?
Yeah, I think that in a way it's become something I return to. And I suppose suppose I was thinking very much with these paintings that, I mean, the shapes doesn't look quite in as good health as it is in these pictures at the moment because this has collapsed on it. I'll go back this coming year and have a look at it and see what state of play it's in now. But I suppose it's become, for me, I thought of it in the past as a kind of actor. In the way you get an actor, plays a particular role, and then he goes on and plays a different role. And that's a sort of...
Is that why actually there is an actor in one of the paintings? Like Shrek.
In that
Poking his head out.
Yeah, well, that again, I thought of it as I'm a great fan of Murnau's films from the 1920s. They were just because they're just very beautiful, but they've got lots of layers of meaning. The film of Nosferatu is often seen as a great film. I mean, it's the only frightening vampire film, I think, in the history of cinema. And I think that stemmed from Murnau's personal involvement in the First World War, and also in his producer's experiences in the First World War in Serbia, where he was billeted with a farmer who thought his father was a vampire. It's full of the trauma of the First World War, as well as being a very sort of mystical film. Very beautiful film. So I've used the ship as an actor, fulfilling different roles. It's been ships in the forgotten evacuations of 1940. It's been the Medusa, referencing Jericho's famous painting. It's been the Demeter, which is the ship in Bram Stoker's novel of Dracula. But in these pictures, it's something else, and I'm probably too close to them to think what exactly it is, but it has occurred to me that because I saw it when I was only, how old would I have been? I would have been 80 years old when I saw the ship, just after it had been wrecked. So I've gone back to it over the years, and I'm now considerably older than 8 years. It's kind of a metaphor for me as well. I was asked last year to do a self-portrait. I thought, what the hell am I going to do as a self-portrait? And I don't do self-portrait. I don't do portraits. How am I going to do a self-portrait? But to some extent, the ship is probably as near to getting a self-portrait as you're likely to get. So it's
the Irishness of these paintings, is that part of that? I mean, I say, you know, perhaps I'm asking too much of them, but in most of these classy paintings, the palette is a corrupted tricolor, isn't it?
It is, yes, yeah. That's something that happened by chance, I think, but it is. But partly because I also had the idea of using gold, or it's actually not gold, it's something called silver verde, the pigment, which is then repeatedly glazed with, it's a reflective pigment, silver verde, so it reflects light back, and it's repeatedly glazed with iron oxide reds and greens, and so it has that kind of quality in it. I suppose I was kind of quite attracted to the idea of the opulence of gold on tarpaulin, of the industrial tarpaulin. So on many of them I use the idea of a golden ground on this industrial surface. And of course the water of the Atlantic can be, beautifully turquoise, blue, so blue, white and gold is reminiscent of the Irish flag. There's nothing nationalistic about it, I actually think. Flags are not my cup of tea at all about it.
But these are paintings that were made at a time when you couldn't travel between England and Ireland in a way that you usually would, and paintings we haven't really talked about so much, which I can see, but our audience can't because they're behind this alcove, are images of the Irish Sea, with a photographic trace taken from the ferry journey across the Holyhead.
Well, in all cases, the key really is it's something that I've seen and something that I've remembered. And that is as simple, the starting point is as simple as that. If I went to Sri Lanka or Tibet for 2 weeks, I don't think I'd be able to make any paintings of those places because I'd just be a tourist. Whereas I've been crossing the Irish Sea for more than 60 years, so I could make a painting of the Irish Sea. And so it's that kind of absolute feeling something in your core being that enables you to make a picture. Because as well as being paintings, they're pictures. Not always the same thing, but these are pictures, and they're all images of a journey in a way. And I suppose that's one of the subtexts of the pictures. And then one of the first ones is called Departure, and then you've got titles that are like that describe cargo or creek or whatever. They literally describe things, but they also have, creek has another dimension to it, something creaking or, so wake as well is a particularly Irish term. My neighbour in County Mayo, the highlight of his social life is a good wake. He comes to can't understand why I don't go to the wakes of distant cousins who I've never met, things like that. Because there's something about that in Irish culture, about the idea of the journey. In fact, it's called the long meander, going on a long meander. Great poetry in that.
Before we continue with our long meander, I think I've got lots of more questions, Hughie, but I realise we've been talking for about 45 minutes, and we should see whether the audience want to make any observations or ask any questions. And if they don't, I'll keep asking questions. There's a question in the second row.
I just want to say what I admire about this painting is very often our commentators turn to read images in a literary way, and they don't seem to understand that painting is a process of accumulation, and that the two things bind together, the image and the paint, are both as important as each other, and that you tend to get a kind of reductive version of what the critic has seen. So, tribute, I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Hughie, can I ask you a question off the back of that observation quickly, which is one of the ones on my list, which is that you often supplement your paintings with texts that you've written.
Yes.
And they're not quite parables because they don't have morals spelt out. They're not quite short stories. But what's the relationship between those texts that you write and what motivates you to feel that you want to add that text alongside? They're not descriptions of the paintings, are they?
No, they're not, and I have absolutely no talent whatsoever as a writer, which is my main strength as a writer, because I have to rely entirely on saying what I'm trying to say in the simplest possible way that I can say it. And I often, when I've done some writing that I'm pleased with, I think, bloody hell, I should have paint like that. I believe you can be burdened with talent in a way that is detrimental. And that's what I was talking about showing off before. The hardest thing, that's why I admire Van Gogh so much. And I wasn't joking when I said he had no skill whatsoever. I mean, he failed at everything he did. Everything. And when he starts, he only paints for 10 years, he takes it up. And his first efforts at drawing and painting are incredibly crude. But it's a force of personality that absolutely drives through this amazing artist. He's not burdened with talent. And he doesn't he fails the only drawing exam he ever took in his life. He never got the results, but greatest draftsman of the 19th century. But so it's about intensity, I suppose, and to get back to the source of the question, I was very reluctant to write. I was pushed into writing by somebody else. An actual art collector pushed me towards writing. And the first bit of writing I did was the best bit of writing I ever did, because it was the hardest fought struggle to actually say what I was doing. And it seemed to me to be obvious that I couldn't write a commentary from the outside on my work. So all I could do was say try and describe the thought process that was going through my head when I'm trying to make a painting. So that's...
I'll come to you in a second. I'll go to the back first and then to the second row again, yes.
Hi. Just the three here, yeah. There are boats in the background, they're not ships, but in the sense that travel is possible or travel may happen. And the building in the centre, there's a sense of dilapidation, as if it's not really fully formed. And yet in the middle, we see something that could be a dwelling, and there's a boy, forlorn, on his own, a child, looking down now. My boy looks down now because he has a mobile phone frequently. And
Yeah.
Like that. There's a sense that that's not what's happening. And I just wonder if there's a possibility here of the sorts of images one sees of places where there are children potentially dwelling forlorn in circumstances where perhaps there are sandbags and there is conflict and there is a sense of escape, destruction.
Well, I think there's lots of things in this painting that I didn't realise were in it when I had the idea of what I was going to do. And I didn't even notice the guy with the mobile phone actually till quite late in the day. It's my first image of a mobile phone wielding individual. And it's actually a very trendy part of Deptford, this near to Waitrose. But it does have a feel of the past of England, the painting by Ford Max Brown depicting people emigrating to Australia on the boat, and they've got cabbages hanging off the boat and stuff, and they're looking forlorn. And I did know that this is, when I thought about doing the painting, that I thought this could be an amazing image of central London in the lockdowns, because it's timeless, it's Dickensian. And to get back to your painting, Michael, I didn't put that in. There's an absence of people in a way. The fact that there's one person in there makes the absence even stronger, because you've got a solitary figure. And I suppose those are things that are intuitive about image forming. And it ties into the question about writing, really, and why I found writing so difficult. Because instinct is I'm a visual artist. I get excited by images, and sometimes I don't quite know what's exciting me about the image. But in the process of doing it, I do reveal something, and I think that's always something that's subconscious. And I just discovered that over the years. People say to me, well, this is obvious. Obvious, I didn't realise it was there, but there are all sorts of aspects of that picture. The river appears to be going in different directions as well, a bit like the image of Van Gogh's image of the cornfield with the paths going to the... so there's lots of things in it, but most of them are subconscious. The simple truth is that I just had an idea to make a picture of the river at Deptford, and it turned out like this.
These are the most urban paintings.
They're the only urban paintings, I think. Yeah. Sorry.
Having written about your work for sort of 20 years probably, and seeing the development, there were two things while you were talking that struck me that are very different. One, both as me being a poet as well as writing about art, I thought when you were talking about truth, I kept thinking of Keats' line, beauty is truth and truth's beauty.
Yeah.
That is all you know and all you need to know. And that's a very romantic idea, but it seems to say something about your work. But then I also thought of something to do with history, and I think it was mentioned Kiefer. And I was thinking, Hughie is the closest we have to Kiefer within British art, and how un-British that is, the sense of dealing with history and the layering. And as because as you know, I'm writing a piece about you, and we talked about this painting, but sitting here looking at it, this monumental ship looks to me almost like the end of history. And there is a way that why I've always loved your work and respected it is that you, I'm not sure uniquely, but unusually among British artists, are prepared to look full frontally at the process of history, the palimpsest of history. And that is very European. I mean, I go from Keats, which is so British romantic, English romantic. But that sense of authenticity and fearlessness, I think, is probably what, as I've known you so many years, and attracts me to the work. There's the sense of truth being uncovered, that, we've talked about this before, archaeology, the uncovering of truth. These are about archaeology, the river flowing, ebbing and flowing and revealing things. And so it's that slow revelation that I think it's pretty unusual among British. I think you should really be a German artist.
How German do you feel?
Well, that's a very interesting question because, German artists have this trauma to deal with. There's that famous quote, how do you make poetry after Auschwitz? And so, whereas in Britain, you had the Festival of Britain, and the Olympic Games or something, and we'd won another war, we thought we were still imperial. So it was a kind of a different, we've had great artists in Britain. Francis Bacon is a great artist. And, you look at Bacon's work and say, well, there has to be a sort of an element of the trauma of the Second World War and the condition mankind found itself in 1945 when at the end of this. unusually for a British artist, and even more unusually for an Irish artist, have focused on the legacy of the two 20th century wars as being absolutely defining moments in human history. There's nothing like that in human history, really, where we nearly get to that point of destruction. And that's a serious subject. I distinguish myself from pop artists and from irony. Those are kind of clear differences.
It's European, isn't it? I was thinking that, I'm sure you saw it recently, the Kosovo exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
At Harley Judah, which is huge. Yes, it feels to me as exactly as you're saying, these are all as British irony. Yes, Bacon's an exception, but he's not British anyway. So. But it fits in with people like Kosovo and Arba, and who recognise, perhaps because of their Jewishness or whatever, that sense of historic trauma. But I mean,
Auerbach's interesting because he never looks back. Auerbach's interesting because he never looks back. He only looks at exactly what's in front of him. That's a way of.
He brings like a black sack on his shoulder, the past with him, even if he's looking for it.
But it's also, you can make that case about Lucian Freud as well, that they're very absolutely obsessive about recording an image in front of them, rather than, in fact, Freud talks about the tyranny of memory, which I think is an interesting expression. And they're both, Freud comes out of Vienna, I think, and Frank Auerbach out of Berlin. And they Kindertransport, I think, so they've got that, and yet they both become the classic British observational artists. So I think there's lots of layers, interesting layers there, and whether they accept that or not, I don't know, but I think of it a bit like that.
Hughie, I think at that point, and thinking about the tyranny of memory, but also the opportunity of mental journeys and actual journeys that you've talked about, and I know that you're off for the first time to Ireland in 2 years on Saturday, so it's a neat full stop to this exhibition, a neat moment of finissage. But I'm going to let our audience now enjoy looking at the paintings off the back of how you've illuminated them for us. Wish you well on your journey across the Irish Sea. And
Not on one of these.
not one of these. Leaves me to say thank you very much to you, and thank you to our audience for coming this evening.
Thank you.